You are listening to Lovely Talks Heavy. Hello everybody, and welcome to Lovely Talks Heavy. I am your host, Lovely, and I discuss everything I enjoy with regard to heavy music. Since this is episode 22, double twos, two twos of Lovely Talks Heavy, I wanted to do something a bit thematically appropriate and discuss sophomore albums. You've heard the old adage, surely, a band's second album is always the hardest to make because they have their whole life to make their first album. This observed phenomenon is known as the sophomore slump because a lot of times a band can have an amazing and impactful first record, but the second record leaves a lot to be desired. This episode, I will be talking about some sophomore albums that I really dig, and hopefully you do too. Let's get started, shall we? There's so much I could say about Paranoid by Black Sabbath. Honestly, if someone were to ask me what music to look at first, if they were just getting into heavy metal, this whole album would be something I'd direct them to. This album has the iconic Black Sabbath songs, War Pigs, Iron Man, something a fledgling metalhead might already be familiar with, and it has my favorite Sabbath song, Electric Funeral. A lot of beginning to understand heavy metal and its history lies in learning about the first few records by Black Sabbath and understanding the artistic motivations behind the choices that were made with these records. And as a result, I've written a lot not just about Paranoid, but also Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath for papers for school whenever I got to pick the subject. There's a docuseries out there called Classic Albums that discusses the making of certain classic albums, and they covered Paranoid on that series. I think the most fascinating thing that I learned from that is that one of Sabbath's biggest hits and title track off of Paranoid was the last song to be recorded on the album, and was a lot more sporadic. It was a lot more of a sporadic creation because there would still have been some room for one more short song on the vinyl. Remember when vinyl was the primary medium through which people listened to music? Anyways, moving on. I wasn't alive when vinyl was the primary method. Anyways, it's quite humorous listening to the isolated track of Ozzy struggling to sing. I'll leave a link to where you can find this. It's really interesting to me. Lupus Day is a wonderful peek into the earlier discography of Powerwolf. It's one of the band's heavier albums, rougher around the edges, with themes that lean more on the satanic, with tad bits of horror mixed in as well. A few examples of this can be found in the use of Falk Maria Schlegel's keyboard in When the Moon Shines Red, and the songs Vampires Don't Die, and Behind the Leather Mask. You can see this is where they begin to shift in themes of their songs a bit. Of course, it's still leaning satanic and horror, but it's presented in a way that is typical of, say, a hymnal in a Christian church. The presentation is consistent with what they're doing now, for instance, the inclusion of an intro track that's like the beginning of a church congregation that transitions beautifully into the next track. The imagery of Christianity is darkened, in a way, and of course, the all-around campiness is maintained as well. There are a few songs I wanted to highlight off the album, Saturday Satan being the first. I love this song because it is just plain silly. It's like if Fear of the Dark by Iron Maiden was from the point of view of the thing chasing after you, and also wanted to seduce you a bit. A lot. Who knows? It's February, it's Valentine's month. I also love the chanting of Satan, Satan! Satan, Satan! At the end of the song. It's great. Anyways, another song I love off this album, and that I've already talked about before, is Tigers Abroad, based on a real story of a real wolf that was really killing the real livestock of real villagers. It twists the story a bit to imply that the Tigers abroad would come back from the dead to seek revenge, because of course, you need that supernatural twist in a Powerwolf song. Before we get to the next album, I do want to bring up Vampires Don't Die again, because it is one of the first songs I heard by Powerwolf after Sanctified with Dynamite and Die Die Crucified. It's literally 3 minutes of lyrics about vampires bragging about themselves. Time for the beast, on hell is unleashed, cry when we drink of your wine. No drop remains, we open your veins, we leave when the sun starts to shine. Has to be my favorite verse in the song. And of course, there's just the chorus, which is straightforward, but honestly great if being played live. Because it's literally just, vampires don't die, whoa, vampires don't die, whoa. And I would love to be in the audience hearing that song live, chanting along with, whoa. Okay, I've rambled enough about Powerwolf for now, let's move on. One thing that's really characteristic of many bands' sophomore albums is that they are part of the band's journey in finding their sound, and Waking the Fallen by Avenged Sevenfold is a clear example of that. While the band have made it a point to do something at least a little bit different with each of their albums, along their journey they've managed to make different kinds of sounds have an Avenged Sevenfold signature to them. That is, until the stage happened. But that's a different topic for a different episode, possibly. Anyways, Waking the Fallen was part of a clear transition for Avenged Sevenfold. From having unclean vocals in Sounding the Seventh Trumpet to having mostly clean vocals in City of Evil, Waking the Fallen has a balance of both. On top of that, this was part of their transition of being a metalcore band to more melodic mainstream rock. This album also has the mark of the classic A7X song inspired by biblical stories, as shown by the ever-popular Unholy Confessions and Chapter 4, based on Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, respectively. Fans of the newer A7X sounds might not be into this version of them, wearing eyeliner, piercings, and with songs way beyond 3.5 minutes, but this is part of Root A7X in my opinion, where you see them fuse together their influences of punk and metal more evidently. Notable tracks off this album, and my favorites to be honest, are Second Heartbeat and Unholy Confessions. Of course, Unholy Confessions is the most recognizable song off this album, and probably the most played song in Avenged performance history, Avenged. You know, when I wrote this thing, I didn't take into account how writing Avenged, apostrophe S, would sound. This is why you read through, and honestly... Anyway. Unholy Confessions is the most recognizable song off this album, and probably the most played song in A7X's performance history, but it is notable because it was the first Avenged Sevenfold song to have a music video, and it highlighted the dedicated local fan base that they had, which I think is beautiful. Of course, I have to talk about Death Clock. I just gotta, okay? Somebody who's probably spent at least 1 million minutes just listening to Death Clock's music, not taking into account the countless hours, days probably worth, of watching Metalocalypse episodes and thinking about every different facet of the existence and concepts of Metalocalypse. And everything in Galacticon. Anyway, moving on. It would be improper to leave Death Clock out of this episode, is my point. I will do my best to keep this part under 5 minutes. No promises. Anyways, Death Album 2 is also a bit of a transitional record. While the Death Album coincided with the introduction of Metalocalypse to the world and was very silly and genre-savvy with songs like Mermaider and Briefcase Full of Guts, Death Album 2 is a bit more serious musically and lyrically. It does still retain the silliness, with songs like Laser Cannon Death Sentence, I Tamper with the Evidence at the Murder Site of Odin, and Comet Song. What's so great about each of these songs is that a different kind of story is being told, and if you're like me, you can imagine a music video to them if one doesn't already exist, or maybe even if it already does exist and there's like multiple different ways to imagine the same sort of thing. Anyways, I don't know about you, but every time I hear the Cyborg Slayers, I imagine a high-speed race between the members of Deathclock. The fictional ones, of course. I would fear for Brendan Small's life if he drove at any speed over 55 miles per hour. What is so special about the way Deathclock have recorded their albums is that Brendan Small would begin by making as Gene Hoglan has referred to it, a skeleton of a song for nearly each Metalocalypse episode, and then when time came to record the full album, they would polish and complete the songs. The first of my favorites off this album is Burn the Earth. It's got a constant tempo that you can easily headbang to and would be absolute torture for a try not to headbang challenge. And I love the use of stereo in the bridge in the song. Burn it away, get fucking paid, being growled in one ear and then echoed in the other. I love it. I could honestly listen to the song forever and never get tired of it. And to bring back the whole music video being imagined thing, which I know there's already a badass music video to the song, but I don't know if you know about this cartoon. It's called Kaput and Zosky, the Ultimate Obliterators. It's one of my absolute favorites, about a couple of alien obliterators hopping from planet to planet and failing to take over leadership every single time. I anyway imagine one of their sort of typical conquests for a music video to the song. With like a lot more sort of flashiness of that's typical of a Deathclock music video. Anyways, the next of my favorites is the Cyborg Slayers, which we don't need to get too much into. The third of my favorites is Volcano, which was featured in the episode Death Doubles. It's about a simple volcanic eruption, not unlike the one that took place in the episode, though I imagine the one described in the song has significantly less coffee being brewed in it. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. Okay, maybe it might belong a little bit. I'm talking about Nevermind by Nirvana. It's more straightforward, aggressive, and significantly less metal. It's clearly the album that brought them to mainstream success and popularized grunge music, inspiring many an imitator. Nirvana made themselves into an essential band with the way that they changed the game with this record, I should say. Of course, you have the popular classic and now covered in 20 different styles by Anthony Vincent, Smells Like Teen Spirit, bass-driven Come As You Are, and melodically recognizable In Bloom. Half of this record is made up of classics everybody knows and loves. So therefore, I'll lavish some extra love onto my favorite song from this record, Territorial Pissings. What initially drew me to the song when I first was introduced to Nirvana as a teen was the straight-up crassness of the song title. But it's just a straight-up short punk song, 2.5 minutes, that I can interpret to be about colonization, the pissing onto territory by people like the British that just doesn't belong to them. Then we have the just as short and very grooving Downjacked and Stay Away. Surely enough, I think this record holds a special place in every single music lover's heart. It's been a long ass time since I've had my head up Lady Gaga's ass. Of course, she's not metal, she's not punk, she's not even a good person, last time I checked. But something really compelled me to include the famed monster in this episode, because partly, I very much miss the old Lady Gaga that made really fun, dancey, poppy tunes, but also I do genuinely love this record. It's conceptual, exploring different fears of hers, with stories and ideas inspiring each of them. You've got the, of course, iconic Bad Romance and Telephone with over-the-top, visually stunning, and way expensive music videos. You have the fear of truth being explored by the song Teeth. It might not seem like it because of the lyrics, it seems very overtly sexual, but it's all about interpreting the symbolism. Dance in the Dark explores a fear of being free, being expressive, and being true to oneself while others are watching. It expresses this with lyrics about a girl who's afraid to have sex with the lights on. Thus, Dance in the Dark. Anyways. And then Lady Gaga laments her fear of losing her father in Speechless. I think there's at least one song on the Fame Monster that everyone can really connect to, either through the fears being explored or through one's own interpretation of what the lyrics could mean. That'll do it for this episode of Lovely Talks Heavy. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Every time the show hits a new set of ears, it means the absolute world to me. What are some of your favorite Sophomore albums? Did I mention any of them in this episode? Hit me up on social media. On Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, and Mixcloud, I am Lovely Metalhead. Also, I've made a playlist on Spotify featuring songs from Sophomore albums that I discussed, and some that I didn't in this episode. I'll leave a link to that in the description, so go on ahead and check that out. Until next week, next Saturday, the next episode of Lovely Talks Heavy, you stay brutal, my friends. Bye.